Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending What Graduate Students and Postdocs Writing NIH Grants Need to Know. Today we have Dr. Jaime Rubin, located at Columbia University. She's the Vice Chair for Investigator Development. And in this webinar today, we will address best practices for effective grantsmanship, approaches for competitive application, common mistakes made by junior investigators, and tips to increase chances for success. We will have a portion at the end of the webinar to field any questions that have not already been addressed within the presentation. We also have, we are scheduled for an hour, but we can extend our time for up to an additional half hour if needed. Without further ado, Dr. Jaime Rubin.
Thank you very much. Thank you for everybody for joining today's webinar. Thank you for the National Research Mentoring Network for hosting it. My first slide is an outline, an overview of the topics that I'm going to discuss today. And just like every other good grant application should start with an outline. At this point, we're going to have a quick poll, I believe. Alexis? Okay, great. Well, thank you all for participating. Gives me an idea of the number of folks in each of the categories. Doctoral students are about half of the participants. MD, Ph.D. students, 7%. Other students, 6%. Faculty member, 7%. Administrators, 3%. 25%. Other. So moving along with the outline that I showed you, briefly an overview of the NIH Fellowship. And also to stop and say at this point that a lot of folks in biomedical research have been thinking about how best to support financially as well as programmatically the development of graduate students and postdoctoral researchers in biomedical research. This is some of the bullet point recommendations from a major report that had been produced at NIH. And I highlighted the top 4 that are specific for graduate students and postdocs. And you'll see the reflection of these recommendations in the application as we go forward. So quickly as an overview, these are individual awards made to a particular graduate student or a particular postdoc. In NIH speak, the postdoc fellowship is an F31, sorry, the pre-doc fellowship is an F31, and the postdoc is an F32. And when I say that they're sort of individualized awards, they're for a particular student and his or her mentor or postdoc and their mentor, and what specific project they're working on. The type of funding that these awards provide is a stipend for the student or postdoc, funding to pay for health fees, any tuition, and travel to a national meeting or other conference where the student or postdoc can present the results of their research. One of the things that's missing here is that there's no money to pay for the costs of doing the research. It is assumed that the student or the postdoc's mentor has funding already to pay for the cost of the research, the reagents, the animal costs, and so forth. The grant itself, the fellowship grant itself, does not pay for the cost of the research. And generally speaking, what are the major review criteria? The individual fellow, the student or postdoc, the mentor, the research project that they propose in the application, and the institution or general environment for the student or postdoc where they're conducting their research and where they take advantage of different career development activities. Just to give you some sort of quantitative information in terms of the success rate. So if blue here is the number of applications and green is the number of awards, red would be the success rate. Basically the number of applications divided by the number of awards. This is for the pre-doc fellowships and the postdoc fellowships, the F32. Similarly, the success rate is in the mid 20% range. And so thus you can see why it's very important that you try and submit as competitive an application as possible to have the best chance of getting funded. Moving along with the overview, to let you know that unlike many other funding agencies, NIH has 3 deadlines a year where they will accept applications for the fellowships. April 8th, August 8th, and December 8th. So we're about a week away from the December 8th application deadline. NIH also has an F31, as you can see off here on the left-hand side of the slide, specifically for students that would meet NIH's goals in enhancing diversity in the biomedical workforce. A good question that has just come up is that for NIH F-Series applications, one needs to be a U.S. citizen or permanent resident to be eligible to apply. Having said that, there are lots of other fellowship programs from non-government agencies where they don't have a citizenship requirement. So this is about a 9-month process, if you will. If you look at the August 8th deadline, if you will, it's about 3 months after the application submission in August to the study section reviews your grant. Then about 3 months after that until the NIH Council, the Advisory Council, looks at the results of the reviews at the different study sections, and then about 3 months after that until an award would be made. So that's what I meant by it's a 9-month process. This is a page that NIH has where they list all the different funding announcements. The F31 for pre-docs for students, the F32 for postdocs, the diversity pre-doc would be in the F31, and there's also an F30 program for MD PhD students. Though diversity MD PhD students would apply for the diversity F31. This is what's called the funding announcement that's issued by NIH for all of their funding programs, and I picked the one for the diversity program. So a couple of points I'd like to make on this slide is here's a listing of all of the different institutes in NIH, and all of them support, all of them fund this, what was called the parent F31 diversity. If one did not meet the diversity criteria, which I'm going to review in a couple of minutes, then one would apply to the parent F31. Another point I would just like to make at this point is that on January 25th, 2018, NIH is transitioning to new Forms E. So they are issuing new program announcements for all of their funding mechanisms for grant applications to be submitted on or after January 25th, 2018. So this program announcement is for all of you that are submitting in December, but for those of you that are going to submit for any of the later deadlines, you would need to use the new program announcement, which has not been issued yet, which is for Forms E. So for the diversity program announcement, they, as you see, NIH wants to stimulate the participation of individuals from the following groups: underrepresented racial and ethnic groups and individuals with disabilities. And they go on to define what meets that criteria. These are folks from ethnic groups, according to the NSF's analysis, that are underrepresented in health-related sciences on a national basis. And with regard to B, individuals with disabilities, these are individuals who are as defined as those with physical or mental impairments. And this is the program announcement for the parent postdoc F32 program. As you can see, supported by all these different NIH institutes and centers. And just to remind you again, if you're submitting after January 25th, you would use the new program announcement and use Forms E. These program announcements have not been issued yet. So now let's continue and go through the NIH grant review process. So I mentioned NIH and all of the different institutes, and here you can see this is my sort of representation of NIH, and there's an S at the end of institutes. So there's a National Cancer Institute, a National Eye Institute, and so forth. And this is the entity or the agency within NIH that would send money, if you will, that would fund your grant. Now there's another entity at the bottom of the screen, the Center for Scientific Review, which I circled, because in many cases, your grant, while funded, for example, by the National Cancer Institute, is not reviewed at the National Cancer Institute. It is, in fact, reviewed at the Center for Scientific Review. This isn't in every case, but it's very frequent, and so I wanted to highlight that. So basically, what's represented here is the Center for Scientific Review reviews the grants and then sends out the grants and the scores to the different institutes for them to determine whether they want to fund them or not. So a representation of an NIH study section or scientific review group, and there you can see the summary statement. So after the study section meets, every applicant will receive, let's say, about a 10-page document, the summary statement, discussing what the reviewers found were the strengths of the application and what they thought were the weaknesses of the application. Every applicant receives one of these summary statements. So this is a listing of the different study sections that are specific for fellowships at the Center for Scientific Review. And it's very important that you make sure that your grant is reviewed at the most appropriate study section. Having a grant land in a study section where the reviewers don't have the most appropriate expertise and background to review your grant, you probably won't get the fairest review. So how can you make sure that your grant ends up in the correct study section? So let's take, for example, study section number F13, which focuses on infectious diseases and microbiology. Well, you can go on the NIH webpage and you can read a brief sort of overview of what areas of research this study section reviews. You can also go and see who are the reviewers that are part of this study section. Now, you cannot contact any of these reviewers, but there is a listing of the members of the study section. Either you or your mentors or any of your advisors should probably recognize a couple of the names as colleagues of your mentors who are serving on the study section. If you or your mentors or advisors don't recognize any of the members, you're probably not in the right study section. But remember, don't contact any of the reviewers. This is just for informational purposes. The NIH will also give you a listing of other fellowship study sections or review committees that might be a better place closely related to the one we just looked at, which might be more appropriate. Another way to look at and see whether this is the right study section for you, many of you are probably very familiar with NIH Reporter, which is NIH's online grants database of funded applications. So here I wanted to see, well, what grant applications, what fellowship applications successfully came out of F13, the study section that's appropriate for infectious diseases. So you can see I did a search, and the only search criteria was the F13 study section. And the day that I ran this, I came out with 130 funded grants that came out successfully were reviewed by that study section. So you can see on the left-hand side, it's a combination of F31s, F30s, and F32s. So if you click on the title, sort of the middle, the second column, if you will, if you click on the title, that will take you to the abstract of each of these successful grant applications. And that will also give you an idea if this is the right study section, because if they've proposed to do work similar to what you're proposing, then it probably is the right study section for you. And so having done all of this and decided on the right study section, what's the next step? So NIH does allow within the grant application for you to request a specific institute and study section and even level of expertise. This is an optional form, but I recommend everybody complete the form. So in the first half of this first page, you can request a specific institute. So let's say the National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Diseases. And in the second part is where you would request a specific study section after you've done the research as I've just described it. And you can even go further in this bottom part of this page and put in different areas of research or expertise that you would like the reviewers to have. Bioinformatics, imaging, virology, I'm just giving you examples. So even within the study section, which still might be fairly heterogeneous in terms of their areas of expertise, you can really try to drill down, if you will, and get your application to be reviewed with somebody who has the most appropriate expertise in the whole grant review process. And I recommend that you do this research and complete this optional form. All right, so continuing through with the grant review process, what is the scoring system and the different types of scores? So NIH uses the scoring system of whole integers 1 to 9. And in the right-hand side, you'll see a sort of very general description of each of the scores. I would say that, and this is called the impact score, I would say that generally speaking, one needs to receive an impact score somewhere in the high range, if you will, to have a chance of getting funded. Now, the score that you receive, and each reviewer, each member of the study section for a discussed application receives an impact score. And then the managers of the study section will take an average of all of the reviewers and then multiply by 10. So remember that, multiply by 10. Because let's say you get a score back and it's a 22. So what that means is that your average impact score before being multiplied by 10 was 2.2. And so that probably means that you got a mixture of impact scores of 2 and 3 from the different reviewers on the study section, which probably has around 20 members, if you will. And finally, what determines which grants are made. So moving along, what are the fellowship review criteria? So you receive, this is what you receive back, a paragraph describing the overall impact, an impact score of your grant application. And with the definition, this is the information, these are the instructions that the reviewers receive. They're feeling that the fellowship will enhance your potential for and commitment to an independent, productive scientific research career. The reviewers then fill out this form based on the 5 main review criteria. 1, fellowship applicant, that's you, the student or the postdoc. The sponsors, collaborators, and consultants, and NIH uses the word sponsors. Some institutions might use the word mentors, some might use the word preceptors. The research training plan that you propose, your training potential to continue to be a success in academic research, and the institutional environment and the institution's commitment to your training. So just to sort of drill down further, these are the exact review criteria that the reviewers are given. And so I think it's important to go through it so that when you are writing your grant application, you are writing it to respond to the review criteria that the reviewers are given. So it's really my suggestion that when you're writing the grant, you have these review criteria in front of you, making sure that you are addressing every point that the reviewers are going to have to comment on. So, what is the academic record of the applicant as well as their research experience? Have they done research previously, and what was the nature of that previous research? What's the potential of the applicant to continue on in academic research and eventually be an independent scientist? Has the applicant demonstrated commitment to a research career in the future? So you'll notice that later on in my presentation, I'm going to discuss each of the components of the application and how you can use each of those components to address each of these review criteria. For those of you that are MD, Ph.D. students, you also need to address issues with regard to you developing in the future as a physician scientist or independent clinician scientist. And then what about your sponsor or your mentor and the collaborators that you're working with or co-investigators that you're working with on the project and any consultants that are helping you with the project? What are the research qualifications of your mentor? What's their track record in doing research? What's their track record of being a mentor? Have they mentored individuals at your career stage? If you're a student, have they only mentored junior faculty? That would perhaps be a problem. Their research qualifications. What are their grants to fund your research? What's their publication track record? Second bullet. Is there a match between their research interests and your research interests? Are they the appropriate mentor for you research-wise? Do they understand that they're mentoring a student in a postdoc, and are they open to meeting and helping solve your research training needs? Are they giving you the time to take courses and go to conferences and so forth? And one of the general comment, one of the things you'll notice I'm talking about is what can they do for you? It's not about what you can do for the mentor's lab or the mentor's research projects or to help the mentor's research grants get renewed. It's all about what the mentor and the collaborators, the co-investigators, and the institution can do for you to support your research training and your career advancement as you move on in academic research. Moving on here, do they have grant funds to support your research? As I mentioned earlier, the F-31 and the F-32 does not provide money to support the research. It's assumed, and the mentor is going to need to demonstrate that they have funding to pay for the research costs. I mean, suppose you get the grant and you show up and day one, you're not able to buy any reagents or anything. NIH, the reviewers are not going to put you in that situation. Sometimes you might have a mentor or co-mentor or sponsor or co-sponsor. And so they want an understanding of how that works and the relationship of the mentor and the co-mentor. Have they mentored together before? Have they done research together, collaborated together before? Or is there a totally brand new relationship where the student or the postdoc is almost the one responsible for making this brand new relationship work? That would probably be a tougher sell with the reviewers. And then moving on past the sponsor or the mentor, what about the collaborators and the co-investigators or the consultants? What's their expertise and what are they bringing to your research training? How are they helping you in terms of the research project or in terms of career development activities? Similar sort of issues for those of you that are MD, PhD students. And then in terms of the research training plan, they want to make sure that the research is of high scientific quality, that it's well integrated with regard to the other aspects of your training. Are you taking courses? Are you taking a course, for instance, in imaging or bioinformatics, if that's what your research project involves? In terms of it being sufficiently distinct from your sponsor's grants, that's not so important for students. It's a little bit more important for postdocs, because postdocs, hopefully when they finish up, are transitioning to independence and transitioning to starting up their own research group and research lab. I think the third bullet is the research project consistent with the applicant stage of research development is very critical. The project has to be appropriate for a graduate student if the applicant is a graduate student, or a postdoc if the applicant is a postdoc. It's got to be a project for a student is not appropriate for a project for a postdoc, nor is it appropriate for a junior faculty member. And also, is the time frame match the research project? A postdoc might be in the lab for 2 or 3 years, a student, let's say, for 4 years. The project can't be a 7-year project if the student or postdoc is not going to be there that long. So the complexity of the project and the time frame of the project has to match the career stage of the applicant. These are among the different details that the reviewers are going to be looking for. Similarly, for those of you that are in MD, PhD programs. And then the training potential. Is this going to be a learning experience for you? And what do you need to learn during this period? What specific new skills or knowledge base do you need to learn to develop into a productive researcher? Will they provide a sound foundation? For example, everybody's sort of concerned about study design and data analysis. Are you going to take a course, for example, in biostatistics? Many people feel that there should be a good foundation in biostatistics. Similarly, for MD, PhD students, the research training and the transition to the clinical years should be well integrated. And then the institutional environment and then the institution's commitment to your training. Do you have the appropriate research facilities and core facilities? Do you have enough that specialized microscope, computer time, specific patient population or animal care facilities so that you can do the research? Also career development programming, professional development programming and workshops, like let's say a workshop on how to give presentations, on how to give poster presentations. Those kinds of things, in addition to the research-oriented, what about other professional development activities? Is it a research-intensive institution of high quality? Are there lots of seminar series that you can take advantage of? And similarly, for those of you that are in MD, PhD programs, is this the right institutional environment? just to quickly touch on with new applications after January on Form Z, for those of you that are going to be involved in clinical trials, which is not that common with fellowship applications, but I think I should mention it, there'll be additional review criteria, which I've listed here. All right, so moving on to the different components of a fellowship application. So what I'm going to try to address in this section of the presentation is what are the different components and how can you use these components to address all of the review criteria and satisfy all of the review criteria that we just went through in a lot of detail. So this is NIH's instructions book, and I just want to highlight for those of you going in for the December deadline, you would use, I've put a red box around it, Forms D, and those of you that go in after January 25th of next year, you would use version E. Each of these sections has defined page limits. They have a very good page, and you can see I have the URLs for all of these pages and so forth. They have a very good page listing all of the different page limits. If you go over the page limit, the application will get an error, and it will not be received by NIH. So make sure when you're writing, you're cognizant of the page limit. When you put together an outline, be cognizant of the page limit. It's very difficult if you go over to start cutting things at the last moment. So this is sort of what the application looks like, where there are different sections, and then you would add attachments or you would upload PDF documents addressing each of these different sections. And I'm going to go through each of these in some detail. So it's a little confusing, but number one is an introduction to the application. And for first-time applicants, you do not complete the introduction to the application. It's a little confusing. But for those of you that might not get funded the first time, one of the neat things about NIH is that you get to resubmit that application. You would get your 10-page set of reviewers' comments, and then you would respond in this introduction. You would say, reviewer number one felt these were the strengths and these were the weaknesses. This is how I'm correcting the weaknesses. And you would then do that in this introduction document. But for those of you that are applying the first time, there's no introduction. There's also no progress report publication list because there is no progress report. So I've just removed 2 sections of the application. So moving to section 2, the fellowship application section. So this is where you talk about yourself, and this is where reviewers learn about you. And I've read hundreds of these kinds of personal statements, and I will tell you that the reviewers will really know you at the end if written correctly. They will understand your passion for research and science and your commitment for a career in academic research. So you would talk about all of the previous research experiences that you've had as an undergraduate, in graduate school. There are even some folks who've had, let's say, fairly rigorous research experiences in high school, part of the Intel program or something like that. They might even mention it. You talk about your role in all of these previous research experiences. And if you got any recognition, any publications, any awards, you should mention them. For those of you that are graduate students, you would talk about, you would move through chronologically and now talk about a preliminary description of your doctoral thesis research. Postdoctoral applicants would talk about their previous postdoctoral research if they had any, and also their thesis research when they were a graduate student. And then having talked about, if you will, the past, now you would sort of talk about the present and the future, if you will. What are your career goals? What do you hope to sort of, what kind of job are you hoping to get? You all want to be independent investigators running your own research group. Those are your overall career goals. And how will the fellowship help you reach these goals? What will you learn? What skill sets, theories, or conceptual approaches will be acquired or expanded? So basically, what are you going to learn? Research-wise, but also in terms of career development or didactics. For instance, what courses are you going to take? What career development programming are you going to participate in? How to write a journal article, how to give presentations, and so forth. And very importantly, and a phrase that you will hear over and over again, is how will the fellowship help you facilitate your transition to the next career stage? So the next career stage is one of more independence. A graduate student will transition to a postdoctoral scientist, and a postdoc will transition to be an independent scientist. And so it's very important to address how the award will help you transition to the next career stage. And then being a little bit more specific, having talked about what your plans are, now specifically, what are you going to do during the course of this fellowship? What specific courses are you going to take? What conferences are you going to go to? Or webinars, professional development, teaching responsibilities that you might have. You're going to talk about the research in more detail in another section, but this is 80% of my time will be taken up by research and so forth. And lay out a timeline of the grant. So for postdoc, you would lay out a timeline of 3 years. A student, maybe a timeline of 4 years. So moving right along, Section 3 and Section 4 relate to the research that you're proposing. And you should really work on this section very closely with your mentor, because your mentors have probably already done this successfully for themselves if they're recipients of NIH grants. There's a one-page specific aims page, and basically it's the goals of the proposed research, the specific objectives, if you will. It's very good if you can highlight a specific hypothesis, such as including a sentence, the hypothesis of my project is. The hypothesis of my research proposal is. So this is how they want the research strategy broken down. One is the significance, and you should work on this very closely with your mentor. The importance of the problem, how it will move the scientific field forward, the impact of your study, how the field will change, and because you've answered the following questions. And what's the approach? What's the methodology and the analyses that you're going to use? What data will be collected? If you could include preliminary data or pilot data, that would certainly strengthen the application. I think it's also good to highlight potential problems. I like to use the word challenges, but any potential challenges you see, and then if you do face these kinds of challenges during the course of the research, how would you then respond? What are your alternate approaches or alternate strategies to try and finish the research project? And what are your benchmarks for success? How do you know that the project is going well? How do you know that the project maybe is a little behind your time schedule because you haven't been able to do X, Y, and Z by such a point? And I'll give you an example. And including preliminary data will only strengthen the application because it'll demonstrate to the reviewers that the project can be done and that you can do the project. So moving right along, they ask about the respective contributions between you and your mentor in developing this application. It should be a collaborative process. It should be that you've written the first drafts of the application, and then you've gone to the mentor or your sponsor and who's offered comments and suggestions, and then you've gone and taken these editorial comments and revised the application. It should not be that you've written everything. You don't want to say you've written everything and the mentor didn't offer any help. How would that look to the reviewer? Well, if they didn't offer you a few hours to help with the application, how much time are they going to give you during the course of the research? And also, they shouldn't be writing the application. It's your application, and it should be a learning experience. So moving right along, selection of sponsor and institution. So why did you choose this mentor or sponsor, and why did you choose this institution? And so really they want to understand about you and the mentor and how your research interests really overlap, and their reputation of being a great mentor and how they've successfully helped previous mentees transition to the next stage. And if you're a postdoctoral applicant, if you're at the same institution where you did your graduate degree, you just sort of need to discuss why you're still in a learning situation, a research training situation. You're in a completely different area, you have a completely different mentor, those kinds of things. And that's one page. Moving right along, it's been for about 25 years or so a requirement that students and postdocs supported by NIH fellowships and training grants receive formal instruction in the responsible conduct of research. Your institutions probably have a course of some kind that you would be required to take. And there's information that you're supposed to include in this section, which is only one page, about what's the format, what are the different topics that are covered, who in your research training is involved in this responsible conduct of research training, and so forth. There might be template language that they're able to give you. Moving right along, this is now the document number 9 that your mentors complete, and this is included in the application. And one of the things you'll see in each of these different sections is the mentors talk about what they can do for you, not what you can do for them or their grants or their research project or their lab. It's about what they can do for you. So section A is what funding do they have to support your research, right? What grants do they have, or institutional internal funds do they have to support the research that's proposed? What is their previous experience with being a mentor for pre-docs and postdocs? If your mentor is, let's say, fairly junior and you're their first student or their first postdoc, maybe consider bringing in a co-mentor or co-sponsor who has a lot of experience being a mentor. So with regard to the sponsor, it's not how great a scientist they are, but also how great a mentor they are. And then the research training environment that's specific to your needs. What core facilities are there? And it's not just a general description of the core facilities, but the core facilities that you would use for your research project. What are the new skill sets and techniques that you're going to learn? And so it's all supposed to be about your needs, courses and seminars and so forth that will help you transition to the next career stage. And you can see that by completing these sections as I've described, you will be responding to the reviewer's criteria. Who else are they supervising during the same time that they're going to be your mentor? If they're supervising 15 other students and postdocs, you're probably not going to get a lot of individual time. And then the final section E is their sort of review of your qualifications and potential for a research career. And then how they will help you in transitioning to the next stage and eventually being an independent investigator. That's section 9. There are also, as I mentioned, new criteria if the research involves a clinical trial. Moving on, section 10, so if section 9 was sort of the letter or the statement from the mentors, section 10 are letters or statements from other folks. So students frequently have advisory committees, or somebody's helping you with a particular assay, or somebody's going to send you a unique cell line, or somebody's going to act as a career advisor, or the director of a core facility is going to help you. These are the kinds of letters to include in this section. And then the institutional environment, which is 2 pages, just to sort of integrate all of the other sort of related things that we've already discussed. The core facilities, the career development activities, and resources. I would stress putting in a course that addresses rigorous experimental design to ensure reproducibility. There might be institutionally offered resources, for instance, from an Office of Graduate Affairs for students or Office of Postdoctoral Affairs for postdoctoral fellows. Graduate students also need to include something from your graduate program, and this document is usually prepared by your program director, not your mentor, but the director of your specific Ph.D. program. And they want to hear about the time to degree of students in this particular graduate program over the past 10 years. When do you have qualifying exams? When are there committee meetings, and so forth? And this document is really to address this section B here, to reduce the length of graduate training. They really want to make sure that the graduate program is watching over the graduate students and making sure that they're advancing towards graduating and completing their thesis research. Facilities and other resources. This is another section of the grant that you can use. So part of it is the sort of classic scientific technical resources, and you would probably get this information from your mentor. What are the animal care facilities? What are the computer facilities, the core facilities? Those kinds of things that you would use in the course of research. But then I would recommend, and there's no page limit in this section, I would then recommend adding another section for the career development resources. And while each of the previous sections have a page limit and you're probably not able to discuss these kinds of things in great detail, you can now discuss them in more detail. Talk about the courses and the workshops and those kinds of things that you referenced in all of the different sections here, because there's no page limit. Programs offered by the postdoc office or the graduate affairs. Also, let's say professional societies. Let's say you go to an annual meeting, for example, of the American Heart Association, and they have programming for students and postdocs. You could add those kinds of things in. This kind of webinar you could include. These kinds of career development activities. I know that folks are putting in questions, and I'm happy to answer them all just as we go through the text or at the very end. I will address all of the questions. For those of you that are responding to the diversity pre-doc fellowship F31 announcement, you need to include one other document under 12 other attachments, and this would be an institutional letter certifying your eligibility to apply for this program. It might come from your graduate affairs office or your grants office. You do not need to specify just that you meet the eligibility criteria as described in that F31 announcement. And then there are letters of reference. So 3 to 5 letters of reference. These might be for graduate students, people who wrote you letters of reference from undergraduate. For postdocs, this would most likely be your supervisor or mentor when you were a postdoc. And these 3 to 5 letters are not submitted with your application. They're submitted separately by the letter writers through ERA comments. And you don't see these letters. These are confidential letters of reference. And I think they're given a fair amount of weight by the reviewers. So think about who can offer you strong letters of reference. Who knows you well from a research perspective, and that you had a good research interaction with them. Could be a collaborator, could be somebody on your thesis committee. These are the kinds of topics that NIH would like them to address with regard to your capabilities. You also need to include a cover letter, and in that cover letter with the application, it's not seen by the reviewers. It's an administrative document, and this is where you would list who the 3 to 5 individuals are that are writing your letters of reference. NIH had put out an announcement a while ago saying that they were going to require formal instruction in rigorous experimental design and transparency to enhance reproducibility. They have not implemented this, but I would still recommend that in your didactic program you include a course or some kind of didactics in rigorous experimental design. For instance, a course in statistics. I think it would enhance any career development program. So all of the material that I've discussed is available from all of these different web pages that you will have access to, and provides more information. So just sort of one final section before I take all of the questions is some general comments about how to develop and write competitive grant applications. We've discussed the specifics of the fellowship review process in terms of the scoring system, the review criteria, and then how to use all of the individual components of the fellowship application to address the review criteria. And now sort of a more general aspect. I like this quote. It's not the will to win, but the will to prepare to win that makes the difference. I find many times that folks just sort of start writing grant applications without stopping first and preparing to write the grant application. So what are some of the things that you can do to prepare to write the grant application? Speak with a program officer at the NIH. Speak with your colleagues, other students and postdocs who have received these grants. Maybe ask them if you could see their successful grant application. It's always helpful to see a successful grant application. Review their agency's review criteria. And then knowing what their review criteria are, think about what would make the application more competitive. What, in terms of research, should you have more pilot data or preliminary data? What career development programming should you work on? Think about who will write those confidential letters of reference. Who should you begin to reach out to? Just now, NIH allows more than one principal investigator for research grants. Then think about maybe you should have more than one mentor, maybe a co-mentor. If your mentor doesn't have significant research funds, or if the work is really very multidisciplinary, bring in 2 mentors in the 2 different areas of research to complement it. Or your mentor, as I mentioned before, might be junior and not have a long track record of being a mentor. bring in an advisory group. I mean, usually graduate students do have an advisory group or a committee, thesis committee, but maybe postdocs think about having an advisory committee. Who will be the collaborators and co-investigators? If your research is multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary, then try to highlight those aspects. And then as you begin to, think about the application more closely, meet with everybody who will be involved in the application and what their roles and responsibilities are. Could you write the section on biostatistics? Could you write the section describing this particular assay and ask all the different individuals involved? Think about what the core facilities are, other research resources you might need, a transgenic mouse line, a specialized reagent or something like that. Meet with the research administrators in your department. Are there any regulatory issues with regard to IACUC protocols for animals or IRB protocols for human research subjects? So having done all that and done your preparation, now you can begin to write the grant application and then read the instructions over and over again. I read them many times. I highlight, I write in the margins and so forth. I use a highlighter and so forth. Identify what the different components are. Maybe make up an Excel spreadsheet to keep track of everything, or a binder with different sections, or a different filing system on your computer. I would say create a checklist for yourself of all the different components, who's responsible for what, and then a timeline of when each of those different items should be completed. Create an outline for each section, and not only just sort of based on content of what you want to cover, but this item is going to be a paragraph. This item is going to be a page and a half, so that you don't go over the page limits. It's very difficult to start cutting text, especially when everything has a deadline. You don't want to be in the position of having to cut too much text. So as you write, you want to have an idea of how much space each of those sections would take. And then, delegate responsibility. Maybe the letters of collaboration, they're not going to write them de novo. They might ask you for a draft letter and so forth. Which part of the research plan your mentor, let's say, can help write. Maybe your mentor has the sort of technical resources from their R01 that they can give you. Make sure you know what the page limits are. If you're going to need to meet with people to discuss the core facility or this section of this letter, try to schedule meetings way ahead of time. Everybody is very busy. You get caught up in people's vacations, holidays, and so forth. And make sure you have a firm timeline for yourself as well as the folks helping with you with the application. Time gets very scarce around the deadline. Make sure, in a very even sort of slight details, make sure everybody's using the same font. You don't want to combine all the different sections and now you're way over and have to start cutting. Even these little technical things. Read the instructions and read them again. Never assume that the reviewers know what you mean. If you want them to know something, tell it to them. If it's appropriate for more than one section of the grant, say it in more than one section of the grant. You want to demonstrate to the reviewers that you know exactly where the field is and how your work fits in with the current state of the field, and you would do that by referring to the literature appropriately. The hypothesis of my study is you want to explicitly state what the rationale of the project is. You don't want to infer anything. Discuss, as I mentioned, limitations or challenges, and then how you would address these sort of problems that come up always in the course of doing research. Whenever you can, try to use tables and figures. If something, instead of using text, if something can be incorporated into tables and figures, do so. Start with an outline so that the grant reads in a very organized way. If you can, ask folks to read the grant and comment on it, and give them enough time, not the Friday before the deadline, so that they really can give it a good review, and then you have time to incorporate any changes that they suggest. In terms of tables and figures, just some suggestions. Don't make them too complicated. Make sure that they're still informative, even if in black and white. They're probably not going to be printed in color. Make sure they're easy to read. Make sure that there's a figure caption with the figure. So when they look at the figure, it sort of tells the full picture. And for further text, try to have the figure on the same page as the further text, so that the reviewer does not have to turn the page, and that it's easy for them to find it on that page. This is an example of a timeline showing that you can get the work done. This is an example of a 3-year fellowship. This is a timeline for the research, and you might include in another section a timeline for your career development activities. And this demonstrates to the reviewers that you've thought things through time, in terms of the time element of doing all the experiments, and it really can get done in the 3 years of this particular grant. Think about all of the questions that the reviewers could have and answer them in the grant. 7, I think, key points of a good proposal. Even as a junior investigator, you want to come off as competent, enthusiastic, thorough, and a professional. Don't use slang and jargon and so forth. I sort of like this slide. Not everything that can be counted counts. So this is sort of the quantitative aspect, where you and your mentor would decide what preliminary data is needed and should go into the research section of the grant. And then not everything that counts can be counted. This is sort of the qualitative aspect, where you're talking about yourself in the fellowship section, where you describe your background and your career goals. When in this personal statement, you talk about your previous research experiences, talk about why the study was important, what was the scientific question, what was your role. Try not to focus on the technical aspects that you learned, like you learned this assay and so forth, but the intellectual things that you learned. You learned about study design and so forth. And any recognition or publications or awards that you received. What are some problems with fellowship applications that might involve a mentor? The mentor is too busy with other responsibilities, administrative, clinical, teaching responsibilities. They're already mentoring too many other people. They're not a good match scientifically. They're too junior. They don't have experience with being a mentor, or they don't have funds. And we discussed some of the ways to deal with that, like bringing in a co-mentor who might be a better match for some of these areas. In terms of problems with the institution, they don't have the core facilities that you need. They don't have the career development activities that are appropriate. So common problems. Make sure that your grant proposal matches the mission of the funding agency, the amount of money, the time frame, and so forth. Don't make it overly ambitious, time-wise, research project-wise, money-wise. That's a common comment about applications from new investigators. This is not so important for graduate students, but for postdocs, you want to show that you're becoming more and more independent and leading your own project. The next 3 are sort of go together. To have the research project hypothesis-driven, that you're trying to understand the mechanism behind what's being seen. And it's not a fishing expedition of just sort of collecting data, if you will. Try to make the research project focused. Let's say you're not doing a bunch of separate studies related to diabetes, but really it's a diabetes study tied together by a central hypothesis. It's always good to have preliminary data. Every experiment, every grant application is strengthened by preliminary data. It has to match the research funds that you have available from your mentor, And then if the methodologies or the expertise are beyond you and your mentor, bring in a co-mentor or a collaborator or a co-investigator. This is what NIH looked like when applications were submitted in hard copy. It's a bunch of FedEx boxes and so forth. I just thought it's a very sort of interesting photograph, and to realize that your application is not really there, but your application is really back there, and you want to make sure your application stands out for the reviewers. So for instance, the reviewers have a lot of applications to review, and they are not, going into their office and pulling down the blinds and dedicating the next 6 hours of their life to your application. They just have a lot of applications to review. And then how do they differentiate them all? Well, let's say there's a certain percentage definitely fund, another percentage definitely not fund, but the vast majority of the applications are in the middle, and they're fine. And if there was an unlimited amount of money, they would all get funded because they're fine. But there isn't an unlimited amount of money. And so what reviewers do, and it's just human nature, they have to find things wrong with applications. So here's just some examples. Some of the applications, let's say, don't have good study design or data analysis. So poor statistics. So those applications are gone. Or maybe some of the applications don't adequately describe all of the research resources that they need. A special cell line, a transgenic mouse line, a unique piece of equipment. So those are gone. Or the career development activities are not discussed in great detail, or are not appropriate for a student or appropriate for a postdoc. So those are gone. This one is sort of a little tongue-in-cheek. The figure caption is font is too small. But basically what I was trying to highlight is that the application doesn't read well. It doesn't, there wasn't an outline. The figures are not informative. It just doesn't read smoothly. So those are gone. So basically at the end, you want to make sure that you're at least one of the last ones standing because they couldn't find anything wrong with your application. And finally, good luck. All right, thank you very much. And so I think in the time, Alexis, we'll go through some of the applications.
Sounds good. Let's go through some of these questions. So
okay.
Question number 1, is there any difference in chance of getting funding if you apply in different cycles?
Good question, but no, because NIH will have a pay line for that year, that fiscal year, and any of the grants in that fiscal year will be funded no matter which of the 3 deadlines that you went for. So a pay line is good for the whole fiscal year, not one of the specific 3 deadlines.
Next question. Can MDs without PhDs apply for F grants?
So sure, MDs who are doing a postdoc can apply for an F-32.
Must studies related to human health, public health, zoonosis to be considered for these NIH grants?
Well, I think that speaks to meeting the mission statement of the funding agency. You would apply to a specific institute within NIH, so cancer, heart, lung, and blood, and so forth. I will say that NIH has a sister agency called ARC, which has to do with the healthcare, the delivery of healthcare. That might be another agency. But what you're proposing for your research study has to meet the mission of the funding agency.
Next question. Should we list former advisors as individuals who should not review our application? Does this represent a conflict of interest?
Sorry to interrupt you. So you can, in that optional form, list specific individuals from a review committee who are members of the review committee who should not review your grant. I have to be honest, I hardly ever see that done. But I would first check to see whether they're a member of the review committee before listing them.
Wonderful.
Sorry, go on.
In a few words, can you share a bit about diversity supplements to R01s and other NIH grants?
Sure. So a supplement is where a mentor receives additional funds for a student or a postdoc. Excuse me one second. Sorry about that. So they will receive extra funds to support a specific student or a specific postdoc working on the specific aims of that research grant. That's fairly straightforward. We've had a fairly good success rate with that. The turnaround time for that is much quicker than a fellowship application because those supplements are not competitively reviewed. They're administratively reviewed at NIH. So I believe they would have a much higher success rate.
So can postdocs who are not U.S. citizens or green card holders apply for this fellowship?
One needs to be a U.S. citizen or permanent resident for a fellowship, for F31 or F32. But I will say that private agencies many times do not have these citizenship requirements, and private agencies do fund individual fellowships.
Next question. If we are at a third year of Ph.D. and are already finished the required and relevant coursework to conduct our experiment, should we also propose courses to take during our training plan?
I would suggest trying to find either a course or webinar or workshop in imaging or statistics or something else related to your research that you hadn't already taken.
Thank you. For MD/PhD students applying to F31 diversity fellowships, is funding solely for the duration of the graduate school?
I think that's a very good question. I think you should contact NIH. For NIH F30, it does include the clinical years of the MD PhD training. So I think the answer is yes, but I would check with NIH about that.
Alrighty, so this is related to the more technical components of submitting. So when submitting these documents, are we expected to include these headlines, example B, training goals and objectives, and then upload the content?
And that's a good question. So if you get a chance to see somebody else's application, you will see that NIH will add headers and footers to the application when you electronically submit it. It will paginate and so forth. It will add your name to the top.
Wonderful. So should you mention consultants and respective contributions or only sponsors?
No, you should talk about everybody who's involved in the application, in the research, or helping you with the research, or advising for career development. I think you should include them. In the description, you should include a letter of support from them, and you should include their bio sketch.
Next question. When would you suggest a new postdoc to apply for an F32?
I think if you had a good amount of preliminary data, that might be a time to seriously think about it.
Next question. How much does using novel techniques or diversity of techniques in your research statement weigh in on the success of the application?
Well, I mean, it's always good to do things that are unique and novel. I think, though, you need to demonstrate to the reviewers that it's doable. They don't want your research project to fall apart in the third month, right? So you want to include preliminary data to show that the project is doable and that you can do it. And if there is going to be a challenge or someplace where it's a little sort of high risk, that you have a way of addressing it.
Is it bad if your mentor has not previously won NIH grants?
It's not great because one of the goals of the fellowship is for you to be an independent NIH-funded investigator. If they have similar funding from another agency, for instance, the Department of Defense, you might be able to make it fly, but they need to be an independent, extramurally funded scientist themselves.
Wonderful. So does the F31 funding amount vary by award or individual, or is it a specific set amount for each award?
So the F31 is, the amounts are set by NIH. I think the only thing that might change is the amount of travel, where each institute might have a different travel amount, but the stipend is the same for all students. For graduate students, you do get a little bit more stipend money each year.
So where in the application does a student discuss personal or academic challenges that they've experienced and overcome to continue research training?
So that's a very good point. If there's something personal that where you've family issues or health issues or something like that that you want to discuss, you can discuss it in the personal section that we discussed. You can discuss it in what's called Section A of your biosketch. And you can also, if you don't feel comfortable talking about it, or in addition, you can have one of your confidential letter writers talk about it. You can have your mentor talk about it in their statement. That's fine.
Okay. Is there a diversity fellowship for postdoctoral fellows?
NIH does not have a separate funding announcement for diversity for postdocs.
This person commented, I saw only Asian American was left out of the minority definition. Is there a specific reason for this?
Well, if you go back to that page, they're using data collected by the National Science Foundation in terms of ethnic and racial groups underrepresented in health-related research.
Okay. Are letters of reference the same as letters of support?
Yeah, I'm sorry if I threw those terms around. These would be the confidential letters submitted independent of your, outside of your application.
Are there any examples of funded proposals for postdocs who are not citizens or permanent residents?
I would, look at sort of the professional societies, voluntary health organizations. Off the top of my head, I know that the American Heart Association, as an example, which is a fairly large organization, has postdoc fellowships for visa holders.
Alrighty. So which grant would you say is more appropriate for early career development or after postdoc or during postdoc?
Well, there's the K99 R00, which does not have a citizenship requirement, and that is a transition award that folks would have in the senior years of their postdoc and in their beginning years of being an assistant professor.
So this question is regards to the F31. What are the best years for a graduate student or a PhD to apply for this type of grant? Also, if a student is more than a fourth year, what kind of dissertation grant is advised for those student plannings to graduate soon and enter a postdoc training program?
Yeah, so NIH doesn't have a dissertation grant. I will say that the NCI has just started a transition grant for those doing cancer research, transitioning from senior years of being a graduate student to the beginning years of being a postdoc.
So what is the longest gap recommended to have between submission and resubmission?
So you can't resubmit until you get the reviewer's comments back. It might be, I don't know, a couple of months or so, but you have to address all of the reviewer's comments. So if they ask you to do some additional experiments, you might not be able to go in for the next deadline.
What should be asked and or addressed when reaching out to an NIH program officer?
You might discuss with them sort of your specific aims, what you're proposing, if they think that that's appropriate for an F31 or an F32.
Okay. So next question, can the project be partially funded by a private company?
Well, there the mentor would discuss what their funding is to support your research.
Okay. Is there an F grant similar to a K99 or an R01?
Well, I just mentioned that the NCI has just issued Graduate Student to Postdoc Transition Award, and it'll be interesting to see if the other NIH institutes follow up.
In your experience, do the pay lines ever change after applications are submitted?
The pay lines can change during the course of the fiscal year as NIH evaluates, their funding. Would be up until September 30th, which is the last day of the federal government's fiscal year.
Okay. Which grant is more appropriate? Oh, my apologies. We answered that one. As a postdoc, will there be any advantage or disadvantage if I include my PhD advisor as a co-mentor?
So it's probably not a great thing because they want to see that you're sort of doing something new and that your research training is expanding your research interests. So doing more of the same is probably not what they're looking for.
What section do you suggest including a plan to take a course for rigorous experimental design? Are statistics courses the only types of courses reviewers are looking at?
So I think you can talk about such courses in more than one section. In the career development section, your mentor can mention it in their statement. When you talk about activities during the course of the fellowship, you would mention it. I think it doesn't have to be statistics, but anything that touches on those topics.
And this person is asking, where might I locate the criteria for a R01 diversity supplement?
I would hate to say do a Google search, but it's an NIH-wide project. It's called Administrative Supplement to Increase Diversity. It's a very common funding mechanism.
Is the NIH more likely to fund graduate students in certain years of their training, for example, a second-year student over a third year or vice versa?
Well, I would say that somebody more senior, too senior, year 5 or something. I think usually you ask for grants for, let's say, around 4 years. So someone who has, significant preliminary or good preliminary data. I think year 2 or year 3 is either are fairly common.
Great. And this is a good question. Will your resubmission come to the same study sections and reviewers?
So that's a great question. It will go to the same study section. It might go to the same reviewers if they're still sitting on the study section. The reviewers, whoever they are, will get the previous reviewers' comments. They won't get the whole application, but they'll get the previous reviewers' comments, and they will see how responsive you were to those reviewers' comments.
Should you list abstracts, poster presentations at meetings on a biosketch, or just publications on a biosketch?
Good question. I would read the instructions, but they say any product, so sure, go ahead.
And what would you consider to be a junior PI?
Well, perhaps someone who doesn't have their own independent research funding like an R01.
Is there a best time to apply for an F31 as a PhD student, sooner in the program versus later?
I think when you have some preliminary data with your mentor, that would be a good time.
Does a co-sponsor include a statement in the sponsor statement, or is it more appropriate for them to write a letter of support?
If they're a co-sponsor or co-mentor, then they need to be included in that 6-page sponsor statement.
Next question. How many F32s can you submit at the same time?
1.
Okay. Do you think it matters what graduate school you attend when it comes to your chances of getting funding?
No, I think it has to do with you, your mentor, and the research proposal that you're proposing, and that whether it can be done at that institution.
Are women considered underrepresented in research?
Not as part of the F31 diversity.
Can your direct advisor write a confidential letter of recommendation?
No, the sponsor cannot write a confidential letter. The sponsor writes the sponsor statement, which is included in the main body of the application.
How many times can a postdoc apply for a fellowship?
Well, NIH allows 1 application and then 1 resubmission. And then if you're not funded in those 2 tries, then you could theoretically submit again, which would then be considered a brand new application.
Which grant is, oh, pardon, we answered that one already. Okay. How many years can a postdoc be covered by an F32, T32 funding? And how many years can you be a postdoc prior to submitting a K99 versus an ROO?
Good question. So you can be funded by as a postdoc, what's called NRSA funding for up to 3 years. And to apply for a K99, you can't have more than 4 years of postdoc research experience.
Which grant would you say would be more appropriate for a junior investigator postdoc RN/PhD? I am working with my mentor and planning to add my research hypothesis into her funded research.
Well, you could apply for an F32, you could apply for K99 or 00.
Can you apply for an F and a K at the same time?
Well, they don't really, in most cases, don't overlap. Fs are for postdocs and Ks are usually for junior faculty instructors. And just as a general comment, I don't recommend submitting 2 grants at the same time. They will usually both suffer. It's just so much work to do one. I think we have time for a few more questions, right? And then at 3:30.
Few more questions.
Sure.
We're coming to a close, but we have
Okay.
time for 2 more.
Okay.
So how should manuscripts under review be addressed? Should they just be omitted?
I'm not sure, you mean in the bio sketch or so forth? I mean, you can sort of mention in the description that, we develop papers under development, but if it's not been accepted yet for publication. I think if it's been accepted but it hasn't come out, then you can include it on the bio sketch.
Alrighty. And last question, are health services/outcomes or comparative effectiveness research funded by F grants, or is it primarily for scientists?
So, good question. I would say for health outcomes, comparative effectiveness research, that you would look at AHRQ, AHRQ, NIH's sister agency, and specifically is interested in those areas.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rubin. I know that we
Thank
could
you.
probably go on for another 3 hours, if you will.
So,
would like to advise everybody to, if your question wasn't answered, please feel free to reach out. My email is listed within the registration. It's alexis.short@unthsc.edu. And we will find a way to have those communicated to you. Also want to make note that this webinar recording will be placed on the NRMN YouTube channel for reference, because I know that there were a lot of inquiries on where can I access these slides. So thank you so much, Dr. Rubin.
Thank you.
Fruitful discussion.
I hope it was helpful to everybody.
Thank you so much. Look forward to the next time, folks. Take care.